Alright, so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about Chapter 13, Administering Virtual Machines and vApps. Just a moment. And really the biggest thing in this chapter is we're going to talk about the configuration files, where the files are stored, and what they do. So let's just go through that real quick. The first thing is I'm just going to talk about the swap file. The swap file, if you're familiar with Microsoft, the idea is we call it a page file. In Linux, you call it a swap partition. VMware, we're going to call it a swap file. Okay, and in this case, I need to readjust my headset just one second. Sorry, it was coming off my head. What a swap file does is it allows you to act like you have more memory than you really have. It's still not like having more memory, but remember, when there's a difference between storage and memory. Storage is where you place things and you retrieve them. Okay, memory is where you use them. Okay, so for example, you turn on an operating system, a copy of it is made and placed from storage into your memory. You turn on a program, a copy of that program is taken out of storage and placed in your memory. Okay? You can only do as much at the same time as your memory will allow. So if you have, let's just use an analogy. I have a 50-gallon drum. I can't store 60 gallons in a 50-gallon drum, but there are times where we need to go over the capacity of our memory. And so what you do is you create either a page file or a swap partition, A swap partition or a page file basically does the same thing. It's a different way of implementing it. And what they do is they say, okay, I'm going to allow the operating system or the kernel to remove things off of memory that aren't going to be used for a little bit and place that into a special area in storage, therefore freeing up space for more applications. And so if you're seeing your hard drive run a lot, it often means that you're swapping back and forth between memory and storage, and you might need to upgrade your memory. It's just a thought. Now, the way VMware works this is it doesn't really create the swap partition until you turn on your VMware box. Now, one thing as kind of a side note is remember that a VMware box or VMware machine doesn't necessarily have to have an operating system. It's just a set of files that represents hardware. Okay. And in a way, when you deploy or install an operating system, you're lying to your... I need to get the pause buttons closer. You're lying to your operating system saying you have more storage than you really do, or more... you're lying telling the operating system, hey, this is the hardware, when in fact it's just a bunch of virtual hardware. It's a bunch of files that represent hardware. Okay, so your swap file is also deleted when you turn off your VMware box, and that makes a lot of sense because that goes to the heart of VMware. VMware is the idea that I have 100 gigs, but I can tell a bunch of operating systems that they can each have 20 gigs each. Maybe you have 10 operating systems that are promised 10 gigs, but you only have 100 gigs. Okay, and so the idea is you're promising more than you have because you know not everyone's going to demand it all at once. It's kind of like a bank. Or let's just take a class. Let's take 1810. I have 18 students in 1810. You'd think I'd have 18 pods, and I don't. What I have is I have 4 pods or 3 pods because I know that all 18 students aren't going to be demanding access to the pod right away. VMware does that. It says, hey, I'm going to be able to... You don't use your processor half the time to its capacity, even less than half the time. So why not maximize that? Why not maximize your hardware in a way that you couldn't before? Because before I'd have to buy 300 or 3 computers all at a certain amount of disk storage or disk space or something like that, knowing that I may not ever use all of that, so I'm not using that storage effectively. Those resources. Well, same thing, same principle here. The BIOS file lies to your operating system, and so the operating system needs a place to point to initialize hardware. Well, this is a virtual BIOS file that fulfills that need. Log files can get very large, but they keep track of system events and things that happen in your operating system or happen to your hardware, your VMware events, and you need to have a place to look for that and read it and know what's going on. It is extremely necessary for troubleshooting. Disk descriptor is going to keep things such as how big is your disk, is it thin or thick provisioned, where is it located. Your disk data file is basically that, just that. It's a pre-allocated space that has been allowed for your data of that disk. Okay, then you have your snapshot, state file. It's basically a descriptor file again, but for your snapshot. And then you have your snapshot data file. And so one describes it, gives us an idea of what it is, and here's where it actually is. And this is a linear file that keeps track of all the changes, okay, that has taken place. And so it's almost like you can almost think of it as an incremental backup if you're familiar with that. But the idea is a snapshot doesn't necessarily take a mirror image of your operating system. What it does is says, here are some key things that we can use to point back and return your disk back to where it was because you screwed it up or something like that. A template file is where I'm going to store all my files, my templates. It's not where I store it. It's my template file that I create and clone other machines from. And so normally what you do is you leave it in the same place. I don't even know what this talks about. Oh, that's what it is. Normally you leave most of your virtual files for a particular VirtualBox in the same place because it's more efficient. They don't have to go across the network to look at or communicate with, things like that. That is true except for perhaps your swap file. Your swap file you might want to move because it is there are more efficient devices out there. Because an SSD drive, for example, is faster than a traditional hard drive, you might want to put your swap file in an SSD drive. Well, you're not going to put all your files in an SSD drive. You're going to put your swap file. Remember, the swap file is dynamically created and it's dynamically deleted when you're done. And so you might want to move the swap file. So one way to do that, let's just go ahead and go to our lab. And you can do it on the host level or on the VMware box level. And I don't know why I have that weird cursor. That's kind of annoying. But I'm going to go to hosts and clusters. I'm going to click on one of my hosts, EXI1, I guess. And we're going to come in here. And don't forget, if you don't have an EXI1, it's just I redid my VirtualBox and I decided to put 2 of them on there. We're going to come over here to swap file location, but first we're going to be on manage, settings, swap file location, and here's where you can change that. Mine's grayed out and so will yours. Mostly it's almost always grayed out. It's not available because there are other things we have to do, but this is where you could actually move it to another storage device. You can also do this on a host level. The way I would do is I just right click it. I'd go to Edit, Settings. Then you're going to go to VMware Options. VM Options, Advanced. And then over here you can see Default Location, Virtual Machine Directory, and Data Store. So you have these different options you can choose. Okay. Edit Configuration, but that's for something else. I don't know why I clicked on that. Okay, and so this is where you can change that location. Let's see, I believe we're going to talk about security in just a minute, and so let me take a look. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. It is so VMware is inherently in some ways more secure than other traditional operating systems. And one of the reasons why, operating system is the wrong word, but implementations. One of the reasons why is because they are by default your virtual boxes are segregated from each other. That's a bad word. I shouldn't use the word segregated, but they are separated from each other. Okay, but there are still some things that you need to do. Either you need to have antivirus on them, or you could use VM Shield, a vShield I should call. It's a lot like VM. It's like a specialized antivirus for virtual machines. Then you can limit exposure. Now, this idea of limiting exposure to clipboard is the idea that I can't right-click and copy from one host to the next and one virtual box next, or maybe I don't want the guest operating system. This is usually when it's done, being able to do a copy paste from the host operating system. And so if there's something corrupted in the host or in the guest, I certainly don't want the host being infected because that could spell real trouble. And so again, it's this idea of isolation. Removing unnecessary hardware. We want people to be able to add and remove hardware from their boxes at times. But we want to be sure that we know what it is. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and that is a place where you can have an attack. So you need to be careful of that. You need to limit writes. Now, by default, you have to have, or not by default, but just because of the way the system works, through VMware tools, there will be some communication between the host system and the guest system. Okay, but it needs to be limited. You don't want unrestricted, because it can open yourself to denial service attack. So you have to be aware of that. You have to lock that down. And for the most part, keep the defaults and you're fine. The default is it limits to 1 megabyte And so these messages can't be very long. Now that doesn't mean it can't be exploited, but it makes it much more difficult. Okay. Let's see, I forget what I wanted to say here. Configure logging. Okay, just keep the log files small. VMware says, hey, no more than 10 files, and the files should be more than 100 kilobytes. And the idea there is you just don't want to use up the number of your logs, and the size of your log. Log files can get very, very big very quickly. You're securing fault tolerance by default. If you have fault tolerance turned on, which is a feature in VMware, you have information going from secondary VMwares to primary VMwares. It's unencrypted by default, unfortunately, so you really should encrypt it using IPsec. Okay, and so that is what we're talking about when we talk about security at this level of our class. Configuring IP pools. IP pools is kind of a confusing topic in some ways. I think it's misnamed, and there is I might add a link some point that explains it a little better. But it's basically providing a network identity, okay, for vApps. So you can almost think of it as DHCP, but it can do a little bit more than DHCP. And so we're going to go through this lab real quick, this activity, and we're going to enable that. We're going to create that and talk about it. So let's do that right now. Okay, and so just let me turn the page so I keep myself focused. We're of course going to be in host and clusters, and I'm going to click on training, and I've got to yawn again. I apologize. Okay, so we're going to go to manage. Now again, we're in our training section, and we're going to hit on manage network protocol profiles. Sorry, I can't talk today. Okay, and from here we're going to just hover over this, and it's going to tell us add. And what this is going to be allow us to add a network protocol profile, which is really the idea of IP pool. Okay, so there's quite a bit in here. You're going to name your pool, and just to be, it makes sense to call it a vApp because it's really for vApps. So vApp, and I'll stay in keeping with the book. We'll say 1. I'm going to say, hey, it's going to be for this network. We only have one network. And if I hit next, it'll move me down. I could also hit finish, and that was good enough. I'm going to go ahead and click there. I could have hit next. And we're going to put in a network number. So let's say it's a 192. Hitting the dot will move you over, so be careful. I hit it, notice I moved 2 over. Once I hit 3 characters, it moved me over automatically. And that's not true in every implementation. For example, Cisco doesn't do it that way, or even Microsoft. So 168, now it's moving automatically the next one. In this case, I'm just going to say .1. Notice it doesn't move me over, so I have to use the dot to move me over, and I'll say .0. If I would have put in something like this, I get red because it says it needs to be a network number. Okay. What's nice though is it doesn't ask you for the mask. It asks you for the CIDR notation, and it lists the mask here. So if you have subnetted it, for example, this, well, I won't go through it, but if you have subnetted it, you'll see this. So for example, I could put 32 in here. Well, it says it is invalid until I change the mask. So let's say 224. Sorry, I don't know what I'm thinking. 224 would be 27. Okay. And you notice how that's legal all of a sudden because it's recognizing. Let's put a 224 mask in there. Default gateway. Default gateway 192.168. See, let's get those dots. It gets me every time. And I even told you to watch out for it. 168.1, and we'll call this .33. So 33. Now again, I'm not setting IP addresses for this. I'm saying here, over here at this level, I'm setting an IP identity for a particular network. Boy, I moved it too far up. Now I'm not going to be able to get to it. Oh well. I can say, hey, I want to use DHCP, but also come in here and say enable IP pools. Okay, and so in here, I can type in, and it should be in this network, 192.168.1. And I'll say 32. Okay. Now I'm going to hit a pound sign, and I'm going to say, hey, I want 15. Okay, so I want to view the range. What this does is it says, okay, starting at 32, so I probably don't want 32. Let's do 33. Starting at 33, I'll have 15 addresses. So it only shows 2. Don't freak out. Hit this arrow here, and it brings it down. At first, when I first experienced this, I saw there was only 2 there, and it kind of freaked me out. It's like, okay, I said 15, did it work? And it does. If you want to do IP version 6 stuff, you can. Oh, it doesn't like that. Default gateway is invalid. I wonder why that is. Page contains, let's see, continuing, oh. I'm trying to give someone that address. That's probably it. So let me do this. So, yeah. What happened was is I said that 33 was legal to give out. So I had to change that to 34. You could do IP version 6 stuff. I'm not going to. I'm too lazy right now. Set network configurations. So I can say what's the DNS, what's the prefix, DNS path, host proxy. So this is a lot like DNS, except it's going to be giving you an identity for your vApps. Okay. And it's just ready to complete. Okay, so you look in here and say, do I have any differences or any changes I want to make? No, I'm going to hit finish, and we will see it right there. This gives us the ability to delete it or to make changes to it. I can look at the configurations down here as well. I can hit edit to edit that, and that's basically IP pool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is managing content libraries. Okay, and this one, it's important that you pay attention to the path that I'm going to use, because the path in the book is wrong. I'm going to try to change the PDF later, but otherwise you're going to pull your hair out. Okay, so let me go through that with you. So in a content library is a place where you can store your ISOs, your templates, vApps, things like that, things that are important, and you can actually make it so you can share them between. You could have a content library that is that another vCenter can look at if you configure it properly. So you have this idea of a local library, which is one that you manage on your vCenter. It's for you, or you can have one that you have that's subscribed, meaning someone else's local or some other vCenter's local that you're subscribed to. Now, a local one is the one you have where you can make changes. A subscriber's one where you're subscribing to it, you can't make changes, but you can choose to benefit from that. Okay, and so when you're subscribing to one, you have the idea of either I can download the whole thing. Okay, so I can elect to subscribe to a library, and you can elect to download all content. Or maybe I just want the metadata. Now, I'd only want the metadata if I wasn't really planning on doing anything with it. Maybe I want to know what they have, but I don't really want, I'm worried about disk space, and so I want to know what's there, but I don't want to use it. Otherwise, the metadata is kind of useless. Okay, so you can choose metadata only. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one of these. So that's our next step, and really our final lab as far as activities that we're going to do right now. So we're going to go to hosts. I'm just going to go to home. And from here, I'm going to go to, the book has you come over here. I'm just going to click over here to content libraries. It's faster. But the book will have you come over here to list inventories, and then from here you go to content libraries. We go to the same exact place. Oh, I need to go back. In a minute I'm going to go back to something. I apologize. I forgot to talk about something. But anyway, you're going to go to objects, and from here we're going to hit new library. Okay, so the idea is we're creating a library ourselves, and I'm just going to follow their instructions. So let me just look to see what they call. I think they call it temp library. Let's see if I can even do that. See if I can even spell it right. So I'm going to call this template. Sorry, I thought I was typing and I wasn't. Let's try that again. Template. Template library. Okay, the server is going to be on for vCenter. That connects us to which vCenter it's going to be on. Hit next. I have to determine whether or not excuse me, it's going to be published externally, and if so, am I going to require a username and password, or am I subscribing to someone else's? Let's just, because this is our first one, let's say it's going to be a local content library, not subscribed. And again, if we're subscribed, I can say download all the content immediately, download library contents when needed. This would be more the metadata. Okay, save storage space by storing only the metadata. So that's what we were talking about before. Okay, enable authentication, I'd have to tell the password. So someone would have set up this with a password, and over here you would say, hey, I know the password, I know how to get there. And so you tell it what's the URL to it, and what do I want? Do I want everything, or do I want just the metadata? Well, we're going to do over here instead. And so we're going to come in here, we're going to give it a password, and we'll confirm the password. And we'll hit next. Watch, it's going to be, yep, I know it didn't match. Now here's where you do the file path. You can't use what's in the book. Now we could choose, and let me get to that in a minute. We can choose either a file path to an to something we've already pre-configured, and to a file path we've already pre-configured. I don't know how else to say that. Or you can look for it on your data store. Okay, and say it's on this data store, or this one, or however you want to do it. In this case, let's just do it this way. This is the way the lab wants you to do it. If you have any questions, you can actually click here. Sometimes this is actually a useful resource. It's a help there. And so what we're going to type in, I have to look at learn real quick because that's where I decided to do things on. And it's going to be on root. It's going to be dash dash or //root/temp. Okay. And so I know those of you who know Linux are going to say that's a temporary, it's not really template, it's for temp storage, but the file path works, and I didn't have to redo all the labs, so we're going to use that. So it's going to be root temp. Oh, I have cap locks on. That would totally mess me up. It's case sensitive because it's Linux. Okay, for some reason I forget how to. How can you forget how to spell 3 letters? Okay, and it should be fine with that. Otherwise, if you don't put that in, if you put what the book says, it'll act like it does, then you'll get this error message here saying it didn't do it. Okay, I'm gonna hit next. Okay, and then we're gonna hit finish. And we should see it's creating it right here. If it didn't create it, you would have had an event here, and you could have clicked there, and you also would have had something pop up over here, but over here where you could read that. So now we have a content library, which is so cool. And so now, if we wanted to, another vCenter can come in here and start seeing what we're storing in our content library. Okay. One thing that I did not do that I want to go back to, and I apologize for that, is I want to go back to hosts and clusters. I'm going to go on to student and look at related objects. Okay, over here, oops, it's not really what I meant to do. Related objects, data stores. Click on data stores, and just one moment. Here's where you can see those files we're talking about. So in the very, very beginning, this is where they're stored. Okay, and so I didn't really close the loop on that, and I meant to. So this is where you'd go to see where those files are stored for that VMware box. Okay, all right. So I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully you guys will. Hopefully this made sense. All right.